Hello, this video will help describe the Stage 1 terrain assessment template that we'll use in the field for Stage 1 New Zealand courses. We'll be using a picture such as the one on the left side. This can be done either on a computer or just handwritten with a print by making an A and a B and having a set of instructions which we'll just go through, as well as on the right hand side I have the terrain assessment score sheet with the prompts for the instructors and the scores to be made of each student. So the other resource is the question template that you will give in association with this picture to prompt the student to mark on the sketch the different features. So we'll give them a scenario of stability and danger rating relative to the terrain that's in the picture, so with an elevation and an aspect, and the type of problem they will have, so whether it's a wind slab or and we'll cover that down on this question down in number 5. So at the start there should be an A and a B on the picture, and we want them to mark on all avalanche terrain using a sort of a cross-hatching shading, ID 2 safe spots between A and B, and a best line that goes from A and B that minimizes avalanche risk. And then given the safe representative, or mark a safe representative site to gather further snowpack information using a circle, and then giving them which problem it is, a wind slab instability problem, what kind of tests would they do in those areas marked by a circle to get the best results to help them decide whether things were good or not. The last one is to write down all the techniques you would use to manage the group through the terrain, either on the back of the page or just on part of the picture that isn't covered with other information. So here in our example we're going to just run through what a student might put in, and then we'll also run through the assessment questions once the student has filled it in, how the instructor would question what's been written down on the and coloured in on the page, on the picture, and how that might be scored, or if there was any confusion, how that might be further questioned or prompted by the instructor to see and check for understanding from the student. So if they were asked to mark all avalanche terrain with cross-hatching, we'll just paint some in here to mimic what a student might do, putting in a line of a line from A to B that minimizes the avalanche risk, along with 2 areas that would be good safe spots to gather and group your teams. The next question was about test sites and what kind of tests would you do and where to find out information on the given problem that was posed by the instructor. So there's a couple of circles with tests inside them, and then lastly there was a list of things to how you would travel safely through that terrain.
I would interview them in front of the terrain where we both can see it, and have already established the A and B points. And I can answer some of these things I can do all by myself just by looking at the response. For instance, the very first question says identify all avalanche paths between point A and B. I look at what this student has submitted, and it's extremely comprehensive. They haven't missed any points, so I would be awarding them 5 points for this particular question. If I see that they had gotten the majority of paths and may have missed a particular area, this is the advantage of having them in front of you, is that you might pick something and point to it on the picture, and such as I'm doing on the left, and say this particular area here you missed. In this instance they didn't, but I would pick the terrain and say this area here you have not identified as avalanche terrain. That's correct, and if I suspect it is, that they've missed it, then I'll ask them, and in certain instances they'll say, oh yeah, that's avalanche terrain. And if they can do that verbally for me, I'm fine to mark them full points. If they've missed small paths with low consequence, but they did miss the path, that's when I'd probably give them 4. And if they've started missing paths that have any kind of consequence at all, particularly given the scenario they've been given, then I would start marking them down in points from there. For this next question about identifying avalanche paths using relevance of 5A's to the danger, I need to interview the student specifically about a path that they've marked. So in this instance, I have my student here, Gordy, and I'm going to refer to this path that he's identified here, and I'm going to say, Gordy, you've identified this as avalanche terrain. Could you please describe to me, using the 5 A's, the relevance in terms of avalanche danger? So for question 2, identify avalanche paths using relevance of 5 A's, this is where I need to interview the student, picking any path that they've already identified, and ask them to identify that path using the 5 A's. As they answer correctly, for each correct answer, in my book, I would just tick whether if the answer is okay or not. I'd just tick aspect, altitude, appearance, and so on. And for each tick, I'd be awarding a point. If they give me a half of an answer, then I would give them half of a point. So it's okay to score in between here as a total. So I would say to my student, Gordon here, say, Gordon, could you use the 5 A's and describe this terrain?
So that this gully feature I measured with the inclinometer, and I got 33 degrees, so it put it into avalanche terrain.
So I'd give him a tick. That satisfies me.
For aspect, I was using my compass, and I could see it was northeast facing, so given the scenario of lead to the southwest, it put it into the avalanche terrain again.
So that's a second tick for Gordy.
Elevation, I used my altimeter and the map, and it fell between, again, the scenario of the wind slab being between 2,000 and 1,700 meters, so it's relevant terrain.
Perfect. One more tick for altitude.
Anchoring, it was above threshold. I can see some trigger points and sort of some rocks showing, but it's definitely above threshold, so for anchoring.
So that's great. He's got both anchoring in terms of plenty of snow to avalanche, yet he also picked up the trigger points down here, so full marks on that one as well.
And appearance, I don't have so much for that, sorry.
Okay. So what I'd really be looking for, if Gordon hadn't mentioned appearance at all, he's got 4 out of the 5, so that's where I'd be awarding that. That's running the strict numbers. I'd be quite concerned that he didn't pick up things such as that are prompted down here: convex versus concave, open and confined. Confined being the big one, that's what I'd really want to hear from him. And it's a good, reasonable sized path, certainly enough to get you in trouble with a terrain trap at the bottom. No mention of those things. I'd be kind of concerned. I'd probably might even ask him about that particular area on another instance. Moving on to en route stability assessments. This I can easily, the first one I can easily get the information from looking at the image where he's put 2 ECT tests as requested. Identify safe representative locations. It's on the lee part of the slope, and it's not on avalanche terrain. So yes, I'd be giving him full marks of 4 on that one. Next one, it says appropriate instability test chosen. Because it was a wind slab, I would be really happy with him using an ECT. Give him full marks on that as a 3. If for some reason I might spot some avalanche activity, and I would probably question: is there any other information? Say there was an avalanche visible. I'd say, is there any other information that gives you quick information about the instability today, and if they said yes, there's an avalanche over there, again, that would back that up. If they missed that, I'd probably mark them down to be honest with you, I think that's quite serious. So somewhere between 1.5 might be an appropriate score given that information. The next one, appropriate interpretation of the test results and avalanche activity. But here I often will just ask the student, I'd say, Gordon, given your ECT that you saw here, you got a positive result 40 centimeters down of a clean, fast shear. What does that mean to you?
Well, it backs up it'll either back up or not the scenario that was given at the start of this exercise, and in this case it backs it up, so we'll continue on with the plan because it's matching what the plan was.
That's great. So because he said that matches the scenario that's been given and confirms my suspicions, then he's interpreted the test results correctly. I'd give him full marks there as well.
I guess the scenario would be if it was much more grave than the scenario at the start, you'd be wanting to hear how somebody would change their activities.
Exactly. Thanks. Under route selection, in the next area, I can easily do the first question. It says ID safe spots given stability and potential danger. I look and see that they've identified one safe spot between A and B that is not on avalanche terrain. Ideal. And it's before a rollover. It's a natural place to pause, so that's great. I look at the other one and I see that it's on a high point between two low points, and that's also a good location, so I'm quite happy with that. So I would again give full marks for this particular one, so we'd be on 5. Appropriate, if I wasn't particularly happy with the location, they could do better, but they've got the idea that there's a better place, then I would give a sliding scale to some less than 5. Appropriate route selection given danger and stability. Again, given the scenario and the nature of the terrain, it's pretty full on, and around here's not a whole lot of options to avoid some kind of contact with avalanche terrain. They've actually picked a very wise route through just a small gut here, and so I'm quite happy with the route that they've chosen. Sometimes you might have to put information in there to have full parameters so they don't wander off down the ridge here or something along those lines. So good, full marks. In here they did cross some avalanche terrain. I don't know, maybe I give them a 9. So a little subjectivity here. Next one, ID, good optional routes under varying danger. This is where I have to ask them. They've already been given some dangerous scenario, and this is where I typically will back it off and check their understanding of other types of avalanche dangers and how to interpret the danger rating scale. So I would turn to Gordon, my student, and say, Gordon, given a loose, dry avalanche problem of low danger, how might that affect your route choice through this terrain?
Well, now I've got the mouse, and I might indicate on the picture that I could push into some steeper stuff off the shoulder perhaps, and but still staying away from the heart of the nasty terrain traps which would lie over here. I wouldn't take on some of these more committing fields, or you could possibly go into this area across, just avoiding, showing understanding of increased potential for the particular nature is what we're looking for.
Great. So I'd be happy with that response and be scoring him in the 4 to 5 range, given what I heard. Under group management, we've got describe safe travel techniques, and there is 1, 2, 3, 4 things to consider here. There's actually a 5th one, which is appropriate spacing, but it's been shown as a separate category in the next question. So for those 4 to consider, there are 4 points available. So I look down over to this area, and I see what my student has written, and he's managed to get 3 of the 4 points there. The only thing he's missed is no stopping. So I would award him a 3 in this instance. On to appropriate spacing for danger. I can see that he has put move, so only one person at a time is on suspect slope, and their potential run out. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, so I'd give him full marks of 2 points on that one. And he's doing well. Lastly, under group management is personal equipment safety measures and trip planning. These questions are queued just above. It says questions to be done on separate sheet of paper in field or in class and applied to both terrain exercises. Just one thing to note, that when you're doing this assessment, obviously need good visibility to pull it off, otherwise you can't really assess terrain. So you pick your days carefully. In a pinch, you could do this in a classroom scenario, but it's not nearly as effective in a two-dimensional way. Anyway, the first one, personal equipment safety measures. This goes. I will typically hand this pre-trip preparation for backcountry travel to my students at the same time they're given the photographs, because it takes you a while to question each individual. It gives them something to do, and then you've got this as record. So I apply these points later. I often don't look at this until I'm out of the field, and I just collect them and add these points in later. Again, answers are prompted on the master sheet for these. So something about this score sheet you might notice is these gray marks. If you circle the gray marks all the way down, they will just pass. So it gives you a little indication when you're scoring of where you should be circling. If you're going by a bit more of a feel as to whether they're above or below the mark, in your opinion. And the categories are there to just quantify where they're what you're uncomfortable with. I do use this as a holistic tool, so if they're missing something really obvious like avalanche activity on a day, and couldn't put that into their planning, or they really are, by point score they pass, but they're taking you right through a really dangerous area and they just don't get it, well, there's a little room to massage this information to reflect the dangerous situation they're putting themselves in. This is a tool, again, to help you quantify areas that they're deficient. In the end, you'll come up with a number down in this area out of 50 that needs to be divided by 2 to come out with a score of 25, which is the percentage of that terrain takes up in a stage 1 assessment. 25%, it's huge. And 70% of that score is 17.5, so they have to score that in the end to pass the assessment.